I'm good, Anthony. How are you today?
Fantastic, and so great to have an expert on the show. You've got a PhD, and we'll really get into your backstory. And probably the best starting point is for you to share with the listeners how you've arrived at what you're doing today.
All right. Well, I arrived at where I should have in the beginning, but took me a while. So um, I'm 63. I'll be 64 in about a month. But when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old, I knew I wanted to be a writer and a teacher, and I knew I loved helping people. I had a knack for helping people smile, even not as a comedian, but just I just like that a lot. When in high school, something happened, and I got more interested in money than I did helping people, and I chose to become an industrial engineer instead of a teacher or a writer. I hated the program, but I finished it, and I got a job right away as an engineer. And immediately, soon after that, met a lady who was just divorced, who had two little girls, aged 4 and 11 months, and the three of us fell in love and got married. I got an MBA because I knew I hated my engineering role, but I got an MBA and got into less technical work. But literally 20 years went by. Well, I had a boy 3 years later, and then 20 years later, raised that family. And in my mid 40s, that little boy in me started to cry out. Like every day going to work felt like just getting back on the treadmill or like the hamster in the wheel. And I remember I was making really good money, had a really great career for, for somebody else, not for a boy who wanted to help people. And I realized I was just trading time for money. And I watched the clock tick in my office and just felt this emptiness. So I reached out to a mentor of mine and shared that with him. And he shared with me that here, he said to me a bunch of things, but he said, "Have you ever thought of owning your own business?" And he paused. And that question cracked open a part of my brain that had been sealed shut for 25 years. I realized that's it. I want to help people. I want to own my own business and I want to help people more directly. So I ended up leaving that corporate job, starting a what we call executive search recruiting business here in the States. And I hired that guy to coach me with this new business I had. My business took off really fast. This was in 2007. And I thought I was going to get rich. Um, I was getting I started for the first time. I'm kind of ashamed of this in my mid 40s, working on myself for the very first time. Until then, it had been good father, husband, provider, but never really consider what do I want. And I started to grow and set goals. And my wife of 20 years did not like this new version of me, who was in her mind selfishly pursuing my life instead of the family. But sadly, that ended up in a divorce. And about this time, the economy melted down in the United States, 2008, 2009. And my fast growing business was fast shrinking business and ended up divorced, paying lifetime alimony, three adult children that were mad and confused, couldn't pay bills. And it went really at the bottom of the, and thankfully, I've never been depressed or suicidal, but really low. My mother, who was a widow living in Florida, called me and told me that she just found out she had a lung disease and needed to get a lung transplant. Her doctor in Florida recommended she get that done at a place called Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. And long story short, that lung transplant department would only take her on as a patient if she lived in that town and had a family caregiver live with her on call 24/7. So at 49 years old, divorced, bald, broke, I moved to Durham, North Carolina with my mother. Running my recruiting company was based in Michigan, so I'm running it remotely. Few months of that, I got pretty bored. I got on an online dating site called eHarmony, met a beautiful woman. A couple of months later, my mother got a double lung transplant, and she went back home to Florida. And I stayed in this new town, running my recruiting company remotely, getting coached once a month, and falling in love. We got married. And I would meet people in this new town who were living the life I used to live, in a job they hate, or in a marriage that's not good, or not happy with their health. And I realized, while I love being self-employed and I like this business I started, I don't love it. I love coaching or helping people. So I became a coach, got trained. And in 2011, I read a book called Flourish by Dr. Martin Seligman that opened the door for me on this science of positive psychology. And I found out that there's a real measurable science around things you can do to pursue well-being and flourishing, emotional well-being. And I thought, that's my calling. And I was like 54 when I read this. Um, then I decided I'm gonna get a master's degree in that, and I shared that idea with my coach, and he said to me, "Don't you already have a master's degree? Why don't you get a PhD?" And so another good question. The answer is I don't know. So I decided to get a PhD. When it came time to do my dissertation, I chose resilience as my topic. I skipped over this in 2013. My first wife, after the middle daughter got married, took her own life. This is 4 years after we were divorced. And that event shook me up. I'm wondering why she was financially comfortable, why she would do that. And it got me really curious about resilience. Why do some people go through difficulties and grow, and others go through difficult situation and shrink? So I chose resilience as my PhD topic. As I was studying resilience, um, my wife and I moved to an apartment in downtown Durham, North Carolina in December of 2019. March of 2020, COVID shut down the city. And a month later, my wife was diagnosed with ALS. It's called Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a disease where you go completely paralyzed and you eventually die. And I dropped everything. I took care of her for a year until she died, which was in May of 2021. I finished my dissertation on resilience, and the research I did became a roadmap for me of getting through trauma and loss. I took a couple of years off, and now I'm back as a back at work. And I wrote a book during that year called Born, Love, Die, which I have right here. This was a story of the journey of my wife's amazing year with this disease. She smiled every day, and we made a decision when she was diagnosed to live every day, one day at a time, with joy, with gratitude, with love. It changed me forever. And after she passed away, I've just continued to like grow in that work. So um, I now coach people one-on-one. I do group coaching. I'm a writer. I do a lot of speaking about resilience. I got married a year ago. Actually, Valentine's Day in the U.S. is February 14th. What, 2 days ago, 3 days ago? It was my 1 year wedding anniversary. So I'm very, very happily married for the third time, third wife. And my goal is to live to 115 with great health. I know that life is bumpy and I can't prevent the bumps, but I do believe that I can affect the trajectory of my life. And it's my plan is to grow through every bump I encounter. And I like to help other people realize that you can grow through trauma or grow through difficulties and still be joyful. So I'm a geek about positive psychology. I'm super interested in being resilient and growing through trauma, and I love helping people. So that's how I got to where I am. Sorry for the long story.
No, it's a really incredible story. A story of inspiration, as you said. You've encountered plenty of knocks and bumps, and you've grown from every knock and bump, and now you're out there coaching and helping and sharing with others how to navigate life's lumps and bumps and knocks and falls. And so, really keen to get into that topic of resilience with you. And really, probably best to start with the definition of what resilience is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Well, it just like with a spring, You push down on a spring, then it bounces back to where it was. That technically resilience is the ability to recover to where you were before something happened, some adversity. And most humans are born with that. Like 70% of people without any kind of intervention will recover from some difficult condition to where they were. Some percentage of people will be permanently damaged by adversity. And PTSD is an example of this. And there's another percent of the population that will grow through adversity. And this is called post traumatic growth. And resilience is the ability to bounce back to where you were. I'm talking about even growing beyond it. So, growth beyond where you were, where it's actually you can look back on that difficult period as a blessing of growth. Viktor Frankl writes about this in Man's Search for Meaning, of your ability to grow through difficulty. So that's my definition of resilience.
And so let's take that definition. So, we all encounter knocks, and there are various knocks, and, some knocks are greater than others. But let's start the process as, okay, we encounter what we perceive at the time as a setback and could be, quite traumatic, as to how do you then, like, in your case, like, for example, you sort of really hit rock bottom at times. And certainly, that sort of around that GFC time when you're encountering a business knock, a relationship knock, and financial hardship. So you sort of got the triple whammy in that instance. So what if you were coaching yourself, that previous self, how would you go about this?
Yeah, no, there's a bunch of answers to that. One is there's a certain amount of this that's genetic. And I think I was lucky enough to be born with very good resilience genes. My mother was very resilient through all her stuff. So I was born with it. She told me I was born a happy kid, kid with a vision. So having a vision of your future is a part of being resilient, because you know that there's more you want to go and be and do. Um, I've learned, though, back in this book called Flourish by Dr. Martin Seligman, he talks about a psychological theory called the PERMA theory of flourishing, which is a roadmap for how to grow in resilience. I teach this, and as I look back on my life before I learned about PERMA, I was sort of doing this stuff anyway, but I'm happy to share with you what that framework is. And it's cool. It not only equips you with a better well-being, relational, physical, emotional, but also builds resilience. So the original theory had 5 letters in it, PERMA. P is positivity, which means to grow in your positive emotions versus negative emotions. There's actually a lady at the University of North Carolina, Barbara Fredrickson, wrote a book called Positivity that talks about a ratio of 3 to 1. If you have 3 or more positive emotions versus negative emotions over time, that's like the tipping point of flourishing. So you can design your environment with that in mind. One example is don't watch television news, at least in the US. It's nothing but negative. Don't watch scary movies. Feed your brain positive things. Another thing is to adopt an attitude of gratitude. And a simple thing like a gratitude journal. If you write down every night before you go to bed 3 things you're grateful for, either that happened that day or in your life in general, that will over time build positivity, because you can't be grateful and negative in the same time. They're conflicting emotions. So the P in that theory is positivity. The E is engagement, or otherwise known as flow. And it's when you're involved in something so deeply that time either goes by really fast or really slow, but time becomes different, and you're so immersed in it that you lose connection with reality in a bit. And a lot of times that's with music or sports or art, but it can also be at work. And I learned this in doing my dissertation while my wife was dying. I was able to get in a flow on my work and be 10 times more productive by intentionally triggering flow. And getting into flow is not only more productive, it leads to more resilience, more well-being. So the E is engagement. The R in this theory is my favorite, positive relationships. It means being selfishly aware of who you're spending time with and surround yourself with people who will support you, encourage you, lift you up. And way too many people spend all their time with the wrong people and drives them down. The M in the perma theory is meaning. This is where my faith is, but it's even somebody without a religion, it's a connectedness to the fact that we're all part of a mysterious universe that's not our physical body. And leaning into that, connecting more into this magic of meaning is directly connected to resilience. And then the A in the perma theory is achievement or accomplishment, which basically means as an adult, continue to set goals to grow. And as an adult, adopt a growth mindset. If you don't know how to do something, believe that you have the ability to figure it out and go figure it out. So, positivity, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and achievement. And they just recently added another letter to this framework called V, which is vitality, which basically means a robust physical health, which I think is so obvious that it was not included in the beginning theory. But the US has an epidemic of chronic disease. So people are very unhealthy here. And without taking care of your physical body, you're not available for these other five letters, right? So I literally measure myself on these six things, and I have challenges to grow, knowing that it'll help me be resilient. Prepares resilience. So and joy, they go together.
Uh, thank you for sharing that framework. I hadn't come across it, so it's yeah, really helpful in terms of understanding that, you know, how to go from the very beginning to a state of flourishing through engaging in those, you know, all those activities. Just in terms of the first letter, the P, the positive psychology, and that's where you've done a lot of your research, and it's, you know, part of what how you coach and share to the world. So just like I'm thinking in the event, like, and you've experienced plenty of these where the, you know, you could take that really low moment around that GFC time that I spoke about, is that the negatives, right, are just stacked. They're really stacked high, right? And I'm thinking at that really low point, it's really hard. Like, so I'm just wanting to, okay, you mentioned, you know, gratitude journaling, but, you know, if you're really, really low, how do you just get yourself to the point where you can actually start focusing on, you know, what's happening good in my life, and start noting that, like, that, yeah, I'm just wondering that
Yeah.
when the ratios are heavily stacked in one side, yeah, on one side.
Yeah. Well, one, I'm a huge fan of therapy. And so that's a time to get therapy, get help. Don't try to do it alone. We have in the US an epidemic of loneliness right now. And when you need other people the most is when you're the lowest. So whether a family or friends or a therapist, you know, reach out, get help. Remind yourself that this low period is like the weather; it will change. And again, I'm very thankful. I've never had a suicidal moment. Like I just can't. I've never had that happen to me, so I can't relate to that. But a lot of people do. And that's where a real professional can help. But for me, it's reminding myself that this is temporary, and um, I read a really good book called The Obstacle is the Way that for some reason really worked to help me realize that every hard thing I go through helps me grow. Ryan Holiday wrote that book, and I read that a long time ago. And so I remember just telling myself, this too shall pass, and I'm growing somehow. I'm growing through this, and just keep on stepping, like keep on moving, right? And it did. It eventually changed.
Yeah, because I'm just thinking, like, if you were asking yourself the question at the time, is, what can I learn from this? What is this teaching me? And and then you start sort of opening yourself up to finding those answers, like, because you're actively open to finding them, I think, by
Yeah,
asking that question.
absolutely.
Yeah,
I remember I was at a really low point. My biological son, who's 33 now and flourishing, had a really troubled teenage time, and I was just obsessively worried about him and would he take his own life. And I remember sharing that with my coach, and my coach walked me through a dialogue of what's the worst that could happen, and literally he talked me through. What he kept saying, what then? And I finally said he would die, and then what? I would go to a funeral, and then what? I got kind of mad, but I said I'd go back to work, and then what? I, I'd keep on. And he said, so do you have enough money? Does he have a good therapist? Do you have enough money to pay for it? Anything else you can do? Yes, yes, no. He said, let go and let God. And not in a religious sense, but in just acknowledging that I've done what I can do. I walked through a journey. What's the worst that can happen? And the worst that can happen is, I'm incredibly sad, but I go on. And it like freed me of carrying that burden, just walking through what's the worst that could happen. And most of the time, I've learned this: the things we worry about hardly ever happen. I've lived long enough to know I can create more catastrophes than are real, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
totally,
but
yeah.
what's the worst that could happen? And then what's after that? And um, so what if you lose your money? So what? As long as you're still alive, you've got more to more to do and be.
Yeah, no, like, I think there's an element I'm thinking that, what can you control? Like, what's within your control? Like, yes, you can have an influence on your son and hopefully a positive influence and help him, but ultimately he's in control of his own life. And it's really that thing, well, what can Brett control? And, Brett can only support his son as much as he can, right? And as get him some therapy, and it's then allow the higher powers to be to hopefully direct him out of his woes, or help guide him through it all. But yeah, at the end of the day, you can't stop anyone.
No. I love the serenity prayer. I don't know if you know this or not, but it basically says, Dear God, please give me the courage to change the things I can, the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference. I love that because we can spend all our psychological energy on things that we have no control over, either through worrying or anger, and then lose that time and energy to work on things we can change. I think it's a beautiful psychology or
Well, it
philosophy.
is, because it leads to that E in terms of engagement. You can't get in the flow state if you're constantly catastrophizing the worst possible outcomes that are out of your control, right? Your mind is well into the future and beyond. And in order to get flow, right, you need to be in the present state. Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
No,
yeah,
I one thing when you said worry, not triggered me. um, I with my clients, I challenge them not to use that word and then replace the word worry with the word aware. It works every time. Instead of worrying about my son having some struggle, I can be aware of that. It's the true thing. What can I do to prevent it or prepare for it? Do that. But worry is like a fictitious superstition that you have some control over the future with your thoughts, which is silly.
yeah. And
Yeah, yeah,
and yeah, well, it's very true. And it, in terms of what it's meant to do is create more awareness, right? Like, in a sense that, okay, I know the worst possible outcome. Okay, I'm aware of that, and as you said, you noted it down. Yes, my son could possibly take his life. Okay, so that's the extent of this situation. I'm now aware of that. Now, what can I do to help him? And
yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah. And then do the things you can do, and then move on. Yeah.
Yeah,
And you talk you talk about presence. So when my wife was my wife with ALS was really in bad shape, and I'd go out, get up before the sun went, before the sun came out, go up on our balcony with a cup of coffee and my Bible and my journal, and watch the sun come up. I remember I was out there one day and I started remembering our lives together, how one it was. And all of a sudden I just fell apart into tears because I knew that that's over. Like that's done. I thought I gotta think of something else. So then I started thinking about the future, and that was even darker because every week she's getting more paralyzed, and eventually she's going to pass, and I'm going to be alone. And I cried again, and I just shook it off, and I just literally looked outside, and I saw birds were flying around, the sun was starting to come up. Took a deep breath, started to hear the sounds of the city, and I realized that she's asleep. I realized it's actually not so bad right here in the present moment. At this moment, life is life is good. And I realized, man, if I can find goodness in the present moment in a journey with my beautiful wife dying, I want to be able to do this later after she passes away and I'm back into normal life, be able to trigger that kind of presence because it was so good. And so I want to be able to get there more often and not let this busy world fill me up with thoughts about the future and thoughts about the past, and get into flow more at work or with my art or with my love, and direct correlation with flow and flourishing and resilience. Yeah.
And what do you do today to stay in that more state of presence, the now, the flow?
I journal. I make sure I get outside into nature and get outside, and I meditate every day. um, I take little breaks and go for just a little walk. I pray. Um, so those are like specific things, and then I really try hard not to multitask and get better at time blocking one thing at a time and turn off the cell phone and the distractions. Not only because it's not very polite if you're with other people, but to keep my brain. I'm with you right now. That's all I'm doing is talking to you. We're in a kind of a version of flow.
Yeah, yeah,
We have an
100%.
epidemic of multitasking craziness. It's nothing but full of distractions, and yeah. So it's controlling your environment and having the discipline to do one thing at a time. I like to get into deep thinking. I'm better in the morning, so carve out like 90 minutes first thing in the morning to do the deep thinking work. You can get a whole day's work done in 90 minutes if you really do that. Actually, research shows that like executives in flow are 5 times more productive than those that are not. 5 times. Most corporations, they live in meetings all day
Yeah,
and don't get any work done.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Distractions.
I used to be
Total.
there.
Yeah. the, the the last one I really want to touch on, because like the R, as you said, is relationships, which is important that you make sure you're hanging out with the people that energize you and support you, and yeah, so that's I get that. But that meaning part, the M for the meaning, because this is what also why people are attracted to distractions, because they're lost, right? And
Yeah.
they're, yeah. So how do you help someone or coach someone to help them attach to that meaning that for you it was your inner child, it was reconnecting with the inner child within you.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I'll do that. I'll ask them to really think back to when they were a child and can they feel that time in their life and remember what turned them on, what they dreamed of doing, what they were most excited about. Sometimes that'll trigger a memory of, oh yeah, I used to really love this, or I used to. So I think that's a clue to maybe what their real giftedness is or their real passion is. And then I go to the other end, and I'll have my clients um, write an obituary of themselves if they were to pass today, and pretend they're hovering over their own funeral, listening to what people are saying about them after the funeral, and then um, write another obituary for 10 years away, or maybe 20, something sometime in the future. If there's like, if they don't like their legacy, if they went today, they've got time to change it. And I share the story of Alfred Nobel, who, I don't know if you know this story or not, but yeah, do you know what, when I say Alfred Nobel, what do you think of?
I, I think of explosives because I was in the
Oh, okay. Well, you
explosive.
know that. Well, so he's known here as the Nobel Peace Prize. But before that, he invented explosives. He got super rich, and those explosives were used in war. And in 1880 or something, his little brother passed away, but the newspaper got it wrong and thought he had passed away. And Alfred Nobel opened the paper and read the obituary of his own death. And it said, Alfred Nobel, king of death and destruction, dead. And he said to himself, if that's my legacy, I'm changing it. And he immediately pivoted to promoting peace. And he died later with the Nobel Peace Prize. So I'll have people really think about their legacy. And then most of my clients have some kind of religious faith, but I just really encourage them to be curious and lean into the unexplainableness of this and kind of admit that we're all connected, and and that there's this a mysterious force of connectedness that if you accept that and lean into that, that builds a resilience of being able to go through the bumps of life, this physical life, better because you're not so connected to it, to your money or your things. You're more connected to a mysterious force of spiritualness.
Wow,
Yeah.
what a great point to, I guess wrap up on. Like I figure that's really the ultimate purpose of life, isn't it? It's to become one with everything and everyone. Like we essentially are so integrated that we're just part of, as you said, this mystery or this ether or this, cause, like we feel so connected, and that's, when we're, yeah, like I think
Yeah.
that's the ultimate aim,
I
in
agree with
terms of,
that.
yeah.
I like I know that I'm a spiritual being having a really short physical experience. Short. It could be this afternoon. I plan to live 50 more years, but so did my wife, and she was perfectly healthy. So you just don't know, right? So I'm spiritual with a short physical experience. I'm not afraid to die, but I love life. And so I want to do both. But when my time comes, I know I'm immediately transported into another realm. So I'm not afraid of it. And it gives me more resilience because the the end of the story is fine, right? Or even great. Um, and I don't know how to teach that. I know that, and I kind of radiate that, but I just encourage people to lean into their faith or their curiosity around this spiritual realm. And then
Fantastic.
that bleeds back into better relationships because you view other people as your brothers and sisters.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, and I was recently visiting my brother in Uganda. He lives over there. He's got his family over there, and that's what they refer to one another as, brothers and sisters. Like it's like like, so like we would refer to, people beyond our family, like like, you could say cousins, somewhat, and then but they're just all brothers and sisters. Like everyone's a brother and sister of one another, and yeah, so I I think that's, and if I look at the traditional custodians of the, of Australia, right, the native Aboriginals, they were very much connected with, the land, one another, and the spirit, and and this is why, when the Western, I guess, influence has really taken them away from that culture and the connectedness, and they feel more disconnected than ever. And yeah, that's pretty much what you help your clients do, is become more connected.
Yeah. No, and I bet the original inhabitants of Australia were happier.
Yeah, yeah, 100%, hundred
Actually,
percent.
I'm going to Uganda in August with my wife
Wow, wow,
on
wow,
a tour to see the gorillas. But
nice.
every time I go to Africa, I feel the love of the people to the land, to each other,
Yes,
to the
yes,
animals. It's
yes.
just this
Wow.
Western life has a lot of troubles to it.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
ultimate journey to oneness.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just In terms of helping the listeners that might be encountering a bump, or how can the listeners best connect with you?
I'm on LinkedIn and on Facebook as Brett Blair, um, BrettBlair. My website is brettblairphd.com. I'm pretty active on social media. I've written 2 books. The one is called From Autopilot to Authentic. This is my book about my journey from, I call autopilot, my life, my corporate life, to my self-employed life. And then the book about the year of ALS was this one. I'm working on a third one right now called Beyond Autopilot. I am a writer. That little 8-year-old boy in me is back. And I don't know which I love more, writing or teaching or coaching, but helping people.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
it's such a joy to meet you.
Yeah, 100%. And for the listeners, I'll include those links to Dr. Blair's website, to his social media. You just go straight to the show notes and you can click on those links and reach out and connect with Dr. Blair. Thank you so much for coming on the episode of Joyful Mate. I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure as well. Have a great day.
You're welcome. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in to another insightful discussion from the Joyful Mate podcast. Continue to spread it far and wide with others that you believe that could benefit from Dr. Blair's words and wisdom on resilience and how to flourish. So please share it as far as possible, as wide. That's the purpose of this podcast. It's the purpose of Dr. Blair's work, is to help and guide others through hardships and bumps and troughs. So thank you, listeners, and thank you, Dr. Blair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Hope that was okay.